progress.
Testing.
Yeah, now I've got to come behind all of you all.
Oh, you're gonna bring us home.
I'm gonna.
You're gonna bring it into like real world.
I mean, my data won't contextualize you guys, will it? That's a mistake to think that. So don't expect.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. If everyone could have a seat. Thank you. All right, so welcome to this session titled Are Micro Schools Sustainable? And we're going to go from left to right here. So our first panelist is James Tooley. He's Vice Chancellor and Professor of Education Policy at Buckingham University in the United Kingdom. He'll be presenting some of his recent work here in the United States. Our second panelist is Amar Kumar. He's founder and CEO of KaiPod Learning. And then we have April Jackson, who's a founder, owner, and lead teacher of Pass Network. So James, if you want to get the ball rolling, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Harvard. Great to be here. The way I'm addressing this question, are micro schools sustainable? I hope this is the way you wanted me to address it, is do micro schools as a sector or as individuals have the ability to continue or be continued for a long time? In other words, are they financially sustainable? Are they viable as businesses? That's the way I'm addressing the question. And my particular interest, which is why perhaps I'm separate from others here, is in low-cost private schools. Low-cost private schools. Now, if anyone hasn't read my book, The Beautiful Tree, then shame on you. But in that book, I cover work in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, China, looking at this incredible phenomenon, which is going around the world, of low-cost, ultra-low-cost private schools that are serving the majority of the urban poor in many of the countries, a significant minority in rural areas. They outperform government schools, and they're affordable to poor parents. So that's my particular interest. And of course, therefore, I've been wandering around a few states in America, wondering if such schools exist here. And of course, they won't be the same as the $150 a year schools I'm used to in Africa, but could you find something similar? So I was in so I've been doing a qualitative approach and a quantitative approach. And here's a few of my slides recently. So this is in rural Mississippi on Monday. And this is a school called Epic. And it's in 2 trailers. And it charges $3,500 per child per year. And this is the sort of school I had in mind when I was looking for these sort of schools. And how did I find it? It's through word of mouth. So word of mouth starts here. If any of you know schools similarly charging $3,500 or similar, please inform me. Very interesting here, because a lot of people think, well, it's in trailers. Is it really any good schools? Well, talking to the students, you find out they see themselves, some of them, as it were, refugees from the public schools. So I was speaking to one of the lads in the back row there, and he's described the public school where he'd been as a hellhole. Another girl it wasn't pulling any punches. Another girl there said it was like high school daycare. And the boy described this, I won't describe it because we're on air, but this, hellish things going on in the boys' restrooms. Utterly hellish things. And he said it was such a relief to get here to be one of 20 kids in a school where the mum and dad, the mum and pop team running it are totally on your side. And so this is to me a beautiful example of a $3,500 per year school which is serving poor communities in rural Tennessee and doing a very good job. And for those of us who are debating language, I was in that session earlier where, what is this called? This is a private school. This is registered as a private school. The kids come 4 days a week, and on the 5th day, work is sent home for their parents, as it were, to homeschool them. So that's a really interesting example. So refugees from the public school. This school, on the other hand, they are refugees from Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Syria. So this is a school in Clarkston, Atlanta, Georgia. Don't worry, I wasn't wandering around Atlanta with no shoes on. I had to take them off because this was in a mosque. This is actually in a former woman's part of a mosque, which they're now moved. And so this guy was renting this school, this setting for, and he had 60 students there. And he was serving communities. And again, the sort of description from the kids and their parents of why they moved there and the help they were receiving there, it was very just low-level stuff that was going on. So there was one girl who was in a public school with 5,000 kids there. And she was just a number, not a name. And she was completely lost. She rebelled. She got into trouble, got into the bad crowd. And her mum was so relieved to find this genuine teacher, Guhad, who helped her get on the right track. Now, look, the question, so do these low-cost private schools exist? So I've been finding quite a few, and you're going to help me find others, I hope. But are they sustainable? So this is another school. And I've been doing these sort of back-of-the-envelope calculations as I go around. And this particular school rents a church building. That's very common to find schools renting church buildings. And it's you can see the catalogue there. So 2 teachers, $48,000 each, but the founder teachers also gets $48,000 a year. So the insurance, that was mentioned this morning in Jeff Sandover's talk, wasn't it? Insurance is a big thing in these schools. I find a big... anyway, this satisfies, if you like, McCorber's principle, income of $210,000 per year, expenditure of $200,000 a year, happiness. If it was the other way around, it would be unhappiness. And you can then just play around with the numbers and see, well, actually, just with a few more students, 20 more students, your surplus doubles, and so on and so forth. So look, that's the qualitative work. In 2 minutes, I'll go to my quantitative approach. And we've been doing a nationally representative survey administered in partnership with Morning Consult, which was the same partnership that Irish Mike was talking about yesterday. We oversampled, and like Irish Mike, I'm also uneasy about this data, but nonetheless, this is what it says. And and let's just see what we think. We oversampled parents who reported they were in low-income households with children enrolled in private schools. So we oversampled and then we corrected for that. But this is one of the novelties of this sort of question is we allowed for those children who were classified as homeschoolers to be called private schools if they were learning outside the home. And incidentally, that school that it was in Georgia, the children there were classified as homeschoolers, even though they were in the school 5 days a week. So we allowed for that sort of thing to happen, and this is what we found. So I defined the low-cost private school as charging $5,000 or less per year in tuition. And we found, these are the figures, 4% of children were in low-cost private schools, 5% homeschoolers, and so on. And we've got a rich set of demographics that we can utilize, but those are the headline figures. And these are the ethnic picture. 36% of those parents of the children were black, 48% white, and so on and so forth, And not surprisingly, children in the low-cost private schools were predominantly the low-cost private schools were predominantly serving low-income families. 70% had an annual income less than $50,000. So look, that's the situation that we can that have been found. That's my 8 minutes. I've got plenty of other slides, plenty of other examples of the way I've been calculating back of the envelope descriptions here. But the important thing for me to conclude is the sector is there. There are low-cost private schools in America. It's a surprise to me and a surprise to many people I've spoken to. They are sustainable, the ones I found. But if that figure is correct, that figure there, 4% of American children are in low-cost private schools. There's about 50 million children, aren't there, in America? So 4% would be 2 million. And if there were 20 per school on average, that's 100,000 low-cost private schools. If 40 was on the average enrollment, that's 50,000 of these low-cost private schools. There is a very exciting business opportunity, the sort Kumar and I were talking about many years ago when we were looking at work in India. And I think, I commend it to you. Thank you.
I got 8 minutes. Are micro schools sustainable? Yes. All right. Longer answer. So, hi, my name is Amar Kumar. I'm the founder of KaiPod Learning, and we support almost 70 schools across the country. Some we run, some we work through partners. And I've probably reviewed more than 100 micro school financial models. I love Excel. That's where I nerd out. That's where I get in the zone. So I've reviewed more than 100 models, and so I'm going to share some of the data and some of the things that I see in these models. So the longer answer is micro schools can be sustainable, but they require, like any small business or any startup, a lot of sustained effort. And they require very deliberate and careful planning. Nothing is sustainable by default. Right? I run a startup. It is definitely not sustainable. On any given day, I'm probably 2 days away from shutting down because it is a scary business. And so I think the same thing is true for anyone starting a micro school. It takes a lot of care and planning. And when I meet new entrepreneurs or founders who want to start a school, the first thing I immediately get into is what I call the great tension. So I want to try something. Who here is running a micro school? Or what you can identify. Can you just stand up just for a minute if you would indulge me? Amanda, you know this because I've done this with you. First of all, yes, wonderful. Let me give you a scale of 1 to 10. If you are a 1, you heavily prioritize affordability. You want your school to be as close to free as possible. You want to serve every single child. That's your heart. And if you're a 10, you're not a greedy capitalist, but you prioritize sustainability, quality, investing in facilities, staff, equipment, experiences, 1 to 10. So 1 is prioritize affordability, 10 is prioritize quality, sustainability. So I'm just gonna go from this side to this side. Just give me your number, real fast. 10, 5, 5, 5. 1? Okay. 5, 6, 7, 10, 5, 10, 10, 7. Did I miss anyone? The average, if I'm doing very fast math, is around 7 to 8, 6 to 7. Yeah, you can sit down. When we start working with entrepreneurs, most of them are like a 2. And these are people who've been running schools. They have enough money to come to Harvard on a conference. They have moved to the right. Most people start off saying, I want to run a totally free program. I want to run something that really meets the needs of the community, which is X, Y, or Z. And the problem is you can't do that on day one. It's not just about heart. There has to be something else. And so the people we talk to who've gotten to year 2 or year 3 or they usually say, well, I wish I would have started off as like an 8 or a 9. And then as I built up a balance, I moved to the left. So that's one thing we hear. We call it the great tension, because in the heart of every education entrepreneur, they know that spectrum internally, and they're debating where they want to be on it. And then sort of the framework that I talk about with sustainability, there's 4 levers. Like the microschool financial models are not complex. You saw James's. It's actually a really simple model. And there's really 4 really important levers. The first is your enrollment numbers. What do you target? The second is, are you disciplined about pricing? The third is, are you disciplined about your budget? And the fourth is, are you realistic about your expectations? So I'll go into those 4. The first about enrollment. Microschool financials are highly sensitive to enrollment. If your target enrollment is 10 and you only got 9 kids, that extra 10% comes out of your own pocket. If you got 11 kids, that's a huge windfall for you as an entrepreneur. In James's model that he showed, I noticed he had 60 kids, but if that microschool founder got to 57, they would be making a loss. It takes a lot of intention and care to get it that close. So enrollment is extremely sensitive. And so what we usually recommend with founders when we advise them is set the right target so that way if you get to 80%, you're breaking even. Don't aim for 100% as your break even. Aim for 80% so that you have a little buffer to grow into. And the other thing we say is, how can you maximize your appeal as a microschool without diluting your specialization? That's another tension at the heart of microschooling. If you want to run a microschool that's really specialized for a very special type of kid, there's only 3 of those kids within 20 miles of you, it's not going to work. But you also don't want to become a public school that's all things to all people, right? So what is that balance for you? Is how do you maximize your appeal without diluting your specialization? And there are principles around being flexible on curriculum, being flexible on schedule, being flexible on activities that can help you do that so that you can hit your target numbers. And the biggest predictor of a microschool succeeding or failing that I can tell, probably 6 to 7 months ahead of them launching, I can usually see this, is how serious they are about hitting their enrollment number. And if they're prioritizing getting their daily schedule right and sort of creating the family handbook, they spend 6 weeks working on the family handbook, but not trying to hit their target enrollment number, you ain't gonna make it. You can see it 6 months in advance. The second lever was around pricing discipline. Pricing is probably the second most sensitive lever in a microschool, right? Because every extra dollar is extra margin, every less dollar is less you have to invest. And when you set a price for your school, it affects who affords your school, how they perceive your school, what you can invest in your school, and how many students you need in order to break even. That's back to your first lever. So it's a really important lever, and if you price too low, you're gonna really struggle to make ends meet. Unfortunately, most microschools price themselves too low. And it's because of that tension. They really wanna be on that left side of the spectrum. And so we try to advise them to start higher. You can always discount, you can always reduce, you can always provide scholarships. But if you're priced low, you'll never be able to raise it. So that's one thing. The other thing that comes into this for founders is a lot of insecurity. Can I really charge that much for my school? I'm looking at Lori here from yesterday. Can I really charge that much? You can, you are worth it. You are building something that is worth it, that parents value, that kids will thrive in. You can charge more. And then for the people who can't afford it, you discount. But you start with charging what you think you're worth. And so we coach our founders. We use a tool called a pricing thermometer that you can look up, which essentially helps you determine the right price by looking at competitors, your cost base, et cetera. And sometimes your price should be higher than competitors. And that is like a whoa moment for a lot of founders. Because when they look at their competitors, they always say, okay, everyone else is at 8,000, I'm gonna do 7,000. Why? You're offering a lot more value than that private school. Why would you charge less? You should charge more, because the perception is different when you charge lower. So there's a lot of fear and even shame for educators when we do that, and that's part of our coaching, is to say you shouldn't be ashamed of what you're trying to do. The third is budget discipline. I'll be really quick on this one. On the income side, a lot of founders want a discount, want to provide scholarships to everyone. Again, their heart is speaking to them, but they can't afford it. And work with some founders who have 10 kids, 8 of whom are on a scholarship or a barter, and the other 2 are on their own. You don't have any money. So you're not paying yourself, you're not able to afford rent, you're not able to buy curriculum. It's not a sustainable micro school. If you want to do that, you can do it, but that's not going to allow you to get into year 2. A lot of those people don't even make it to 6 months, and you're not benefiting anyone when that happens. Cost discipline, thank you. Cost discipline, don't overcommit to staff, don't overcommit to low ratios, don't bring in outside facilitators every single day, right? All of those things. In year 1, you've got to be really realistic. And that's my final point, is year 1 looks different than years 2 and beyond. And so we really help them say, start small, be reasonable, don't hire too many people. And this also comes to fundraising. They say, I'll just fundraise the rest. I know there's some funders in here. What do you think? If a micro school tells you, I'll just fundraise the rest forever, not gonna work. No, the funders they're excited about this sector, but they're not endlessly patient. You need to get to a sustainable model. So I'll stop. Those are the 4 big levers. I'll make one final point about sustainability that's not financial. There's the education entrepreneur themselves. Sometimes they run out of steam. That's another sort of angle of sustainability we can talk about if folks are interested.
So as stated, I am April Jackson. I have a micro school in Atlanta, Georgia. I have 16 children now, ages 8 through 13, and our niche is providing a culturally relevant learning experience with high academic achievement as the expectation. And I am happy to say that the youth in our program grow by 2 grade levels in reading and mathematics every single year. And we do that because we look at the data, and we let that drive our instruction, and we let that drive our fun. So we take field trips every other week, and we enjoy ourselves, and the children are free, and they are free thinkers, but they are achieving. When we talk about sustainability of micro schools, I'm with you. The answer is yes. We are definitely sustainable. I want to go back a little bit in history so that we understand that we've been sustainable, and we've been here for quite some time. And I'm going to look at one particular community in particular. Of course, I'm going to look at the Black community and how micro schools have existed. We can go back post-Civil War, and we go into the clandestine schools. And we talk about schools, pit schools. And if you're not familiar with those were literally schools that were in pits that they would cover, and they would learn inside of those. We talk about Sabbath schools, where black free and unfree would go to learn. We go post-Civil War, and then you have to talk about the Rosenwald schools with Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald of Sears and Roebuck. They founded 5,000 schools in the South, micro schools. They didn't call it that then, but that's what it was. 5,000 schools in the South. That's when Black people in the South were the most literate in this nation, even up to this date. You can look at the 1960s, Mississippi Freedom Schools, 1970s with the Black Panther Liberation Schools. You can look at charter schools as a movement in education that is a micro school movement. Look at how they permeate urban communities, and look at the success of them. We talk a lot about there are some schools that are not getting it right? There are definitely some charter schools that are not getting it right. But for children in urban communities, they are doing way better than the public schools are. Now you're here, post-pandemic, and now we're at this word micro school. And you have schools like mine, and you have schools, about 15 of us, because I'm also the co-founder of Black Micro Schools ATL, where there are about 15 or so micro schools in the Atlanta area. and non-traditional learning spaces where there are probably 300 to 500 children inside of these programs. So now we've established that we've had micro schools. This is the history of them, the necessity. As long as you have people that are saying that, giving false narratives that critical race theory exists inside of public schools, and that leads to that bleeds into social emotional learning, and so we take social emotional learning outside of schools, but at the same time we have actor shooter drills, there will be micro schools. As long as teachers are being abused inside of schools, it's being recorded, posted on social media for likes and views, there will be micro schools. As long as you ban books by Maya Angelou and Alice Walker, you're going to have micro schools. And as long as you allow people like Lucy Calkins to deliver a reading curriculum that's used across this nation and leads us to a place where 60% of fourth graders in this country right now are not reading on grade level, you will have micro schools. With that being said, how do we become sustainable? Well, part of that is we have to take some responsibility as individuals. We have to take our own accountability. If we are going to lead micro schools, we're going to have the business acumen to do that. We come in as educators with this great heart, as you spoke about, for teaching and helping children. If we do not learn the marketing, the branding, the accounting, if we don't understand taxes, these are businesses at the end of the day. If we do not do that, they will not be sustainable. If we don't address the teacher trauma that many of us that are edupreneurs coming out of education have experienced, it is traumatizing every year, year after year, to have to buy border to put up in your room so your room will look nice and inviting for your children, to have to make sure that you provide the snacks for the children that can't eat, to stay over, give your time to tutor children each night with no extra pay. And we're used to doing that as teachers. I was in education for more than 10 years in public education. That was the norm, right? That's the norm, but it is unfair. And if we don't correct that and deal with that trauma, then they will not exist. If we depend too much on fundraising and on grants, nobody is running to give us any money, you all. Right? I thought when I started this, I started for-profit and nonprofit, and we're going to, there's this money out there. Everybody tells you there's all these grants out there. One organization gave $10,000 one year, and that was it, right? Even despite that, this year our revenue increased by $35,000, right? That's without any state funding. That's with very little change in tuition costs and so forth. You have to have a sound business model because Jeffrey Canada said it, there's no Superman. We are the Superman for our communities. And lastly, the policies. That's long-term goal. The money needs to follow the child, plain and simple. If it takes, in Atlanta, $13,000 is what Atlanta Public School gets per child. ESA that just passed in Georgia, the Georgia Promise Scholarship, will give us next year $6,500 per child. How do they need $13,000 in Atlanta, but I need only $6,500 in my micro school? The math ain't mathing, right? So one of the things is that money needs to follow the child, and the last thing is that those people that do see this and see this work and see this impact that want to give, they need to give sustainability funding. They need to give long-term funding. It should not be 1 year, $10,000. There's nothing we can do with that. That just kept the lights on for 2 months. You have to be willing to invest and invest over time. Right now, even though I've increased my revenue, I still have a $30,000 deficit. Somebody could cut a check. Tell me that $30,000 could keep me in business for another year and serve these children and more. That $30,000 you gave somewhere else, how much of an impact would it make? That would matter to me. It would make a difference to me. But we're going to get it, right? Because we have a business model and we have a plan for that $30,000, but still. So are they sustainable? Yes, but there are some things we have to do on the policy side, and there is some accountability that we have to take as leaders.
Thank you. So when I listened to James' presentation on the sustainability question, I thought, well, okay, microschools are sustainable. They're low cost. And then we heard Amar talk, and it sounds like what Amar is suggesting is maybe some microschools need to raise their prices in order to be sustainable. So could you kind of talk on that a little bit? What is it exactly?
I mean, both are possible, and I liked this idea of grading us from 1 to 10. I also run a microschool in England, and I'm definitely on the 1 or the 2. And it's legitimate to be there. You can be there for philosophical reasons. First of all, I set up the school in Durham in the northeast of England because I wanted to prove that you could do something much more cheaply than the state could do it. I wanted to prove that they were wasting money. So there was a philosophical reason. But then there's also the reason to extend, to want to reach many, many children. And I have found, and over my work over the many years, that what you said was if you lower your price, you'll be less valued or something, and raising the price. I don't think that's true, and I always give examples of supermarkets. There's a very posh supermarket in England called Waitrose, and people buy their posh wine there, but if the wine is ever discounted, it disappears straight away. People like discounts. People like lower cost. So yeah, but look, I'm the visitor, and I'm learning. These guys know much more about it than I do, and that's my view anyway.
If I can answer that too, I think I'm not saying everyone should raise prices. Obviously, I don't believe that. I think what I believe is that if your model relies on, like, for example, I'll give you a real example of someone I was talking to 2 months ago. She wanted to build a microschool for neurodivergent students, especially those who are on the autism spectrum, lower functioning students. So she says, I can't have more than 3 kids per educator. I'm like, great. What do you want to charge? $4,000. I was like, okay, that's fine. $4,000 times 3 kids, that's $12,000. How much would you like to pay this educator? $40,000. Okay. Where's this going to be? I want to rent this beautiful retail location I found. It was like, again, math ain't mathin', right? So I said to her, your vision is great, your business model will never work. And of course, instantly she's like, well, I'll raise grants for the rest. Like, I was like, that's not gonna work. So to her, I had to say, you have to raise that price. If you want to do a 3-to-1 ratio and build an extra support, you have to raise the price. But if you're doing a 20-to-1 ratio in a trailer in Mississippi, and those kids will thrive in that model, you know, probably a lot of those kids are not going to be severely neurodivergent, because in a 20-to-1 ratio, you probably have a little bit more of a blend. Then you can get away with $3,500. That's fine. So I think it depends on who you want to serve and what your vision is.
I agree. I think it depends on the population. I think it depends on the area that you're in. May demand more. If I'm in Mississippi, in rural Mississippi, then it's different. I'm in Atlanta, it's different. And so you have to charge that. But I think also the other part of the business model that you have to consider is that should not be your only revenue stream. I think that's a huge mistake that people make in this model. If the only money you're getting is through tuition, that's a problem. Yeah. No business model should operate like that. You have to figure out what's going to be the secondary revenue stream, whether it be using your business for additional revenue, using the facility itself, renting it out as revenue stream, or maybe you add a tutoring component, but you don't physically do it because you don't want to do anything that's going to be more laborious upon you as the leader, because you need to be back behind the scenes doing some of that work. But find another revenue stream.
Okay. In the 3 years I've been attending this conference, I think the buzz around microschools has been incredibly strong. And you hear some very compelling stories, really strong testimonials. But I'm wondering about how do you, obviously microschools, they have very different goals, and so we probably need a nuanced set of metrics in order to be able to evaluate them. And the couple of times that I've been able to sit down with a microschool leader to think about evaluation, it doesn't get very far. For various reasons, and I'm just wondering what you all think about that. How can we evaluate, if at all, microschools in a way that makes sense?
I think every model needs to have its own measurement. Let me tell you how to measure me. Let me tell you what my goals are for my learning community, right? Because my goals may not always be these academic. I am, because I am an academic, I am a former teacher, so I care about the math data, I care about the reading data. But for some parents that are sending their kids there, they don't care about any of that. That's just not what their goals are. So I think we have to be willing to say, what are your goals, and are you meeting the goals that you have established for yourself? And that day, I think someone yesterday was talking about how hard it is to get this data. We just got to embrace you're not going to get it, right? I'm not a micro school, technically. All of my children are homeschoolers. So how are you going to get that data? You're not going to get the data. Be okay with that. Be okay and trust me to do what I say I'm going to do.
I think you just asked an accountability question without using the word. That's very impressive. While I agree with what April's saying, I can imagine it feels concerning to a lot of people. And I know it does, because I have these same conversations. I'm on the same page as you, but we've got to find a way as a sector to be less squishy. We've got to find a way to say, okay, there is something. Let's put a taxonomy around what parents value. Parents should drive it, but there should be some taxonomy. I'll give you one interesting data point. In our KaiPod network of schools, for the schools that we ourselves run, we ran the MAP test last year. We did a pre-test and a post-test. Parents could opt into it. A huge percentage of them did. And so the students did a pre-test at the beginning of the school year, and they did a post-test. And during that period, some families also unenrolled from KaiPods. It happens. Not that much, but it does happen. So that was a really interesting segment analysis I could do. The kids who stay at KaiPod from year to year and the kids who leave. Would you believe it? The kids who leave did 10 points worse than the kids who stayed. That tells me parents knew something wasn't working. And so now I can start to see a little bit in the data, just a very, very small glimmer of hope, that parents are effective consumers. They made a decision. They didn't see this test score before they unenrolled. That came after. They knew that it wasn't working. And so the small group of segment of kids, not a huge statistical sample, but they knew, and they scored less. And so I think we can do better as a sector to create some more definitions of success that parents value. And then the microschool says, this is what I want to be evaluated by. This is how I consider myself a success.
Yeah, I learned a new term yesterday, just-in-time evaluation, which I think is I think maybe you said it, I don't know, but whoever said it, parents get that sort of feedback all the time, and they can decide, based on that feedback, how the child is doing in math or language, whether that school is fulfilling their needs. But I also agreed, I don't know if Italian Mike is still here, but I also didn't, I agree with Italian Mike. Once taxpayers' money is coming in, then accountability is raised as an issue, and I much prefer the idea of taxpayers' money not coming into schools and not bringing in that dimension. But then also, Jeff Sandifer in Acton mentioned he even in his model, he begged, and I think he used that word, begged the children or parents to allow their children to do some standardized tests once a year. And again, that's what I've seen many schools do, and I do it in the school in the north of England myself. We do use some national standardized tests by the National Foundation for Educational Research, it's called, and because we want to check that our kids are learning above grade level, which they typically are, but we want to check on that, and so we do have an outside check as well. But I think there's horses for courses, and I like the way parents can choose in a genuine market or moving towards a market. Yes, I want that sort of thing, or I don't want that, and there can be a diversity of models, I think.
Questions? Yes. Professor Bartlett.
Hi, Betsy Bartlett, Harvard Law School, and I'm really interested, James, in these schools that you're studying in poor countries, and just because I do think we can learn from it, but I'm just curious to learn more who's teaching these schools and also what socioeconomic groups are going. Is it really poor kids, and are there no schools, I think you said, in the area? Just a little more detail.
Yeah, but and that's the work I've done in Africa and Asia over a lifetime, and it's not live at the moment. But what's very interesting for me is a typical school in the slums of Lagos or Monrovia. a typical school will start as a mum homeschooling her 3 children, and a few other parents come and join, so she has 10 or 12 students in the classroom. It's incredible to me to see the same model growing here in America as I've seen in Lagos and Hyderabad and wherever else in the world. So it starts like, a typical school starts like that, and then they do kindergarten with her, and then first grade comes on. They say, well, first grades can't be that different from kindergarten. Can we just stay with you? And so a school is grown from the bottom up. Very typical model. And so these schools typically in very poor areas. Look, I won't go into too many details. I've written about it in The Beautiful Tree, which you haven't read, clearly. I do recommend it to you. But seriously, what I'm seeing in America is so similar to what I've seen elsewhere, seemingly on a much smaller scale. In the slums of Monrovia or Lagos, 75% of the kids are in these low-cost private schools. And they're massive, but still, it's very interesting to see the models and to recognize something quite remarkable could be happening here as well, if you believe in the private sector, which I do.
Yes.
So I think that we can agree that one of the big goals of microschools is to lift up students and raise our communities and ideally lift them out of poverty, if that's the case. And I think that should be true for the educators and edupreneurs as well. And so how are you balancing the need to pay a fair, livable wage, which incidentally, I don't know that $48,000 is, with the need to provide school to many students of many different backgrounds?
Well, again, the wage is dependent upon the area, right? You said that school is in Mississippi. $48,000 in Mississippi may not be the same $48,000 me in Atlanta or someone in New York. So I think that you decide what the living wage is where you are and make sure you get it. And you have to decide who is the child that can pay that, right? Who's the family that can pay that, whatever that number is. And I tell anyone, always start with what you need to make. We tend to do it in reverse. We think about what we want to charge first and then figure out how much we can pay ourselves afterwards. Don't do that. Figure out what your number is that you need to survive and what you have to give someone that's going to be high quality, that's going to come in and support you, and what that is going to be, and then you pay from that. Then you figure out what the tuition is going to be from there. I hope that addressed your concern.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a really important question to me, and I'm glad I didn't show you another slide where the wage is a lot lower than 48,000. Let's not tempt fate on that. No, in a way, this is a really tricky question. So, if I can answer it from the work I've done in Africa and Asia, the wages in the private schools, in the low-cost private schools, are typically a lot lower than in the government schools. And the suggestion is typically from outsiders is, well, therefore they're underpaying them. I say, actually, the government is overpaying, and the unions have pushed the wages of school teachers in other countries sky high. Of course, I'm not going to comment on that in America.
No.
But is it possible? Is it possible? And also, I've seen models where you don't have any teachers, you have tutors. Tutors who come in for an hour a day, teaching physics or mathematics, algebra, whatever, and they earn a lot less than a teacher, but nonetheless, parents and everyone seems to prefer that model. So I would like us to break away from what do teachers get paid in public schools, and not assume that that is the right answer to that question.
Yeah, Pat.
Patrick Wolf, University of Arkansas, and new expert on colonoscopies. So,
Please, I had nightmares about that last night.
So my question for the panel is, how do you keep micro schools micro? because it seems like there are a lot of forces pushing those kinds of organizations towards bigness. I mean, you have administratively, you have economies of scale, and then you have like parents. Some parents come in and they want choir, they want band, they want foreign languages, they want a football team. So how do you keep micro schools micro?
I can start us off on this one. I think, well, micro's in the eye of the beholder, right? Like, what does that mean to you? Maybe different. Like we heard someone earlier today who had a 150 student micro school, and there are others that have 5. So there's no clear definition. And if you have time, you should ask Raphael about his food truck analogy for micro schools. It's really effective. Anyway, so the economies of scale, I think, it's worth studying more, because I don't know if there is an economy of scale in education. I think there might be some diseconomies of scale. Certainly when it comes to quality, we know there are diseconomies of scale. But once you get beyond 20 or 30 people, maybe you need a nurse now, and maybe you need a check-in receptionist, and you need all these other stuff that you don't need if you stay under 20 to 30 people. So I did some analysis about 1.5 years ago where I said, like, at one point, does your overall net income or net margin go down? And I think it's around 25 to 30 kids. There's some kind of a sweet spot at that number. And so if you can get to that point, your cost of real estate, your cost of 2 to 3 educators, you can actually perfectly price something at that point. And now, yeah, you can't afford band and choir and a nurse, but I don't think those parents are looking for that. At least the parents who want band, choir, nurse, they're not coming to your school. They already have an option. So that's how I would answer. I think the forces that are pushing to scale stop at like 25.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
We're able to offer kickball. I'm actually very serious. We do. We can't offer football. We don't offer basketball. We offer kickball, and we get together with other schools and Black Micro Schools, ATL, and we have kickball games, and we are the reigning champ in my world. We do offer STEM. We have someone that comes in that offers STEM. We have Spanish at my micro school. We have someone that comes in for that. Art, drama, and even we leave out for swim. All of my children are required to learn how to swim and swim competitively in the Black Micro Schools ATL swim meet. So what you do is you create community. And by creating community, you could offer more things. Last year, I could not offer art. I could not afford it independently. So what I did was bridge with another micro school in my area. And I could afford the transportation to get over to our school, but I couldn't afford the art teacher independently. So that was cheaper. So we just hiked over there, and we took art over there. But this year, I can afford to add it to my micro school. So the way that you do it is you can do it. You can do it. You just learn to negotiate really, really well. And you know the value in what you offer, right? My children are valuable, and my money is good. And so you're not going to charge me $500 for what I know you can get for $300, because I'm giving you long money, right? I'm giving you money over 12 weeks versus a one-time. So now I have the ability to negotiate prices, but you have to know that you're worth that. And so I negotiate prices well, I collaborate well, and then in the long term, the idea is to franchise it out so that it can stay small.
Yes, right over here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm new to the whole micro school movement. I run an adult charter school in DC, and we started. Technically, we were a community-based organization, a staff of 12, and a students of, where were we? Maybe 150 to 200 students. Transitioned to a charter school, and now 1,000 students, 40, 50 teachers, and pull down the per pupil funding to do that. And I guess what I'm struggling with is why. And I'm learning, micro school, particularly if you're pulling the per pupil funding or somehow that money is traveling with a kid, why not charter versus micro? And I'm learning. Admittedly, I'm learning. I'm still not quite getting it. And because the schools are sounding much larger than what I came in with thinking that whereas a charter school, economies of scale with the students and per pupil, why not that route and keep a small school as opposed to, particularly if you're pulling the per pupil funding, is my question.
I think most micro schools are not pulling per pupil funding. They're privately, I think 80 to 90% of micro schools have private pay. Those that are in states with education savings accounts, they can access the state component of the per pupil funding. That money travels with the family, but it's only $6,000 to $8,000 depending on the state. So that's one reason. The second is a lot of states have caps on charters, including this own. You cannot open new charters anymore. I think California also has one, so that route has been closed. And the third, I would say, is the regulation in charters in many states prohibits the kind of flexibility you're seeing in these models.
So look, I'm on a panel about micro schools, but I don't necessarily believe that's a helpful title, because as far as I can see, and I described what I saw, going on in the rest of the world, schools might start small, but then they can grow, and typically that's a good thing. Unlike Amar, I think there are economies of scale with schools. They can be in terms of marketing, admissions, HR, finance, all the back office things that a school can have. They can be shared with a chain of schools, a network of schools. And also you can do sporting with a chain, a federation or whatever of schools. I co-founded a federation in Nigeria called AFED, a wonderful Nigerian name, the Association of Formidable Education Development. Got 5,000 schools, nearly a million kids. And they get together all the time for common pursuits and teacher training and curriculum development. So I think there are, but the schools can typically stay small, but I don't know there is a sweet spot, 12 kids, 15 kids, 20 kids. No, I see the micro school as almost a temporary label denoting a school that's starting, but they can grow bigger, can't they? I think, yeah.
Yes.
I'm with one of the regional accreditors, and accreditors are typically seen as the enemy of emerging school models, but we may be the only accreditor that actually feels quite strongly positively about emerging school models and supporting them, and recognizing that the current model of accreditation is outdated. It doesn't really work for the innovative work that you all do. One of the things that I love hearing from everybody at this panel and in other places is the importance of business modeling, which starts with understanding the jobs to be done for the customer or the client, framing that as the delivery of value, and then putting together all of the component pieces. One of the things that's antiquated about accreditation as it currently is that in the standard for resources, we simply say, what's your 3-year budget? Which is important, we need to know that. But if there's no underlying understanding by the founder of how that business model is going to produce the budget in the first place, it's a little bit of a charade. So if that's an example of a way in which perhaps the accreditor can deliver value to the school. We don't lobby states, we don't ask states to require or not require accreditation. But to the extent that it is required in some places, or micro schools and other forms of schools are incented to pursue accreditation to get access to state funding, what are some of the things that an accreditor can do that the state's going to require the accreditation? So if the state's going to require accreditation, what can we do that's going to deliver real value to you that allows us to really promise to the public that this is a sustainable model? Like business modeling to me, like requiring a simple business model, not the financial, not the budget itself, although I think that comes as well, but like requiring a business model, that seems really smart. Like a founder should know the business model. Just-in-time assessment, formative assessment, that seems like also like a really smart thing. What are some other things that we can ask for, not because necessarily we want it, but it's going to deliver value to you?
I love the idea, Christian, of mid-state light accreditation. So, not the heavy burden that inevitably you have to put on other schools, but a very light accreditation process, which looks, as far as possible, doesn't penalize that school that's in a trailer, for instance, looks at outcomes rather than inputs, and just has 4 or 5 simple outputs if possible. This school is accredited. I actually think it would be a very powerful thing. I love the idea of private sector self-regulation, and if a school can say, okay, we're accredited by Mid-States Light, and parents can feel confident, the children can feel confident, the proprietor can feel, wow, I've really achieved something here, I can be much more confident. So I think it's a great idea.
Let me get over to this side of the room here. Anybody have a question here? Oh, okay, I haven't turned my head in that direction. Okay, how about right back here? Yeah, I don't know where the mic is. Okay, Ron has it.
My name is Jeremy Fairbanks. I am with the Massachusetts Home Learning Association. And Amar, specifically, you mentioned your 4 levers to succeeding in creating a microschool. What can we, as a cohort of alternative educators, what can we give as far as consistent messaging to our communities to help educate others on what we do as far as all the options? You got hybrid homeschools, you've got microschools. I see a lot of fracturing and confusion in people's assumptions of what it means to be an alternative educator and an institution as such. Specifically, we were talking about teachers. What does it, how can we explain what it means to be a teacher in our sector can look very different to what it means to be a teacher in the public school. Specifically, I know, Amar, you earlier this week spoke at the U.S. Senate to a board on educational reform. There was one moment where one of the panelists asked, in a microschool, what would happen if one student wants to learn Mandarin, another student wants to learn French? How would the teacher deal with that? And your answer was pretty much, I will paraphrase, that a teacher has more resources available to them. They are not the sole point of knowledge in the classroom. That the teacher would leverage online resources or any other resources at their disposal that a public school teacher may not have access to or think of. When the panelists who asked that question heard that answer, it was a powerful moment. I could see the notion click in his head when that little bit of understanding came through that a teacher's not always a teacher as the traditional sense may be. So what sort of, I guess, consistent messaging can we as a community give to others to help broaden this understanding to others, whether it be our neighbors, our politicians, and such?
That's a big question. I think it's the power of example is the biggest thing, like learning and hearing from some of the stories in James's travels or the people at this conference. Seeing the diversity of the movement is the powerful thing for everyone. Like some of you know this, when I started KaiPod 3 years ago, I had a very specific vision of what I wanted to build, what I thought every child needed. So I built that, then I did it 12 times, and then I said, oh, actually, not everyone wants this. And so now KaiPod has pivoted into a very different model where we empower teachers to create their own vision of education in their own community. And the strength of the entire microschool movement is in its diversity, in its resistance to being defined, in its resistance to doing one thing the same way. That is literally its strength. And if we break that, and if we try to regulate, if we try to over-define or put us into little buckets, this conference won't be as dynamic or as vibrant in the next few years. So I think, Jeremy, to your question, it's about examples and sharing more and more of those as how teachers show up, how founders start schools, the different business models, et cetera.
Thank you. I think we could take one more question. Lisa?
Thanks, Antonio. So I was wondering, like, the business models that James and Amar talked about really depended on, a financial pricing structure. But I know from some of the models that I've looked at, they do use like parent volunteer labor, all kinds of unique ways of bringing costs down in ways that actually do seem sustainable without having to have it be 100% tuition based. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit. Obviously, like if you're trying to scale, that might not be as sustainable, but in the sense that a lot of these solve for like community problems, and according to the Vela data, some of these models do seem to stay around even when they are using kind of community-based solutions.
Well, for me, I'm able to offer art now because my art teacher, is one of my students' parents. And so we definitely utilize that model. My substitute teacher is one of my parents. So we utilize that, and it's important, but you have to know how many students, parents you can utilize in that way before it is no longer sustainable. You can only take, just like all things, for instance, in my model, I know how many children I have to take at full price. I know how many children I can give a 25% discount. I know how many children I can give a 50% discount. It's knowing the numbers inside of all things. It doesn't mean that I always do right. Now, I'm saying these things, and I'm telling you now that I'm not making the best decisions all the time because I'm still living in the trauma of being a public school teacher. But I'm doing better every day about this, but I do think there is a place for that, but it has to be limited. You can't take 5 children with one parent offering this, one parent offering, you just can't.
Yeah, bartering is extremely common and encouraged in micro schools. And we've seen bartering for staff, like you just mentioned, for space, for furniture, for supplies, for renting a van, everything. But everything has a price. So if you're getting a little bit of furniture, that's not worth an entire tuition. Right? So build it into your financial model and price it accordingly.
All right.
It might be the opposite, that actually you get someone in who's much cheaper than a teacher but can do equivalent work. So, it can work both ways. And the other thing you see differential pricing a lot is in terms of you have one child, you get one free or one cut price. That can also be worked into the business model.
Yeah. With the specialization of youth sports, it's refreshing to hear about kickball, I must say. So I think we're a little bit over time, but thank you to this panel. Really appreciate it. We'll see you all for the next session.